They thought the new girl was quiet and defenseless, but one of them lifted her skirt in front of the whole dining room, and a minute later he was already lying on the floor apologizing. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're from. It really matters to us. The bus ride to Ridgeview felt longer than it actually was. The wheels groaned over clean, paved roads framed by rows of identical white picket fences and freshly mowed lawns. Outside the window, the morning sun was already rising over the neat little town, touching each house with golden light. Naya stared at the passing scenery without blinking, her forehead pressed lightly against the glass. Her earbuds were in, but she wasn't listening to anything. It was just a shield, a barrier, one of many she had learned to build. Today was her first day at her new school. Again. The move had happened fast. Too fast, in her opinion. 1 week they were still in Chicago, and the next, boxes were being carried into a pale beige 2-story house in a neighborhood where the air smelled like rain and detergent. Her adoptive mother, Dr. Carol Martin, had been offered a tenure-track position at a small liberal arts college in Ridgeview, a safe, clean town that prided itself on its traditional values and low crime rates. Carol had seemed genuinely excited when she told Naya the news. A new start, she had said. A chance to breathe. Naya had nodded, even smiled a little, but her chest had felt tight the whole time. This would be her 4th school in 5 years. They had arrived a week before the start of the school year. Carol had thrown herself into preparing her syllabi, reading in the living room late into the night with a mug of tea and yellow sticky notes stuck to her laptop. Naya, meanwhile, had avoided unpacking. She didn't put up posters or photos. She kept her bags half-zipped. It was easier that way. No roots, no expectations, nothing to lose. Ridgeview High sat on a slope that overlooked the town like a watchtower. It was large, modern, and polished, its walls clean, its windows sparkling. There was even a marble fountain near the front entrance with an eagle carved at the top. When the bus pulled up, Naya was the last to step off. She walked across the lawn with her backpack snug on her shoulders, keeping her head down. Her skin, the deep brown of roasted coffee beans, stood out starkly against the pale sea of white students around her. They noticed. She felt it. The glances, the slight double takes, the whisper that ran through a group of girls as she passed. Her uniform, a simple pair of jeans and a long-sleeved olive hoodie, was nondescript but somehow still wrong here, in this school of pastel polos and Lululemon leggings. In homeroom, the teacher mispronounced her name on the first try. "Naya?" "It's Naya," she said quietly. The teacher gave her a perfunctory smile and waved her toward an empty seat in the back. No one spoke to her. Some stared. One boy, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned sideways in his chair to get a better look, then leaned back and smirked at his friend. Naya ignored him. She spent most of the morning navigating between hallways, avoiding eye contact and mentally mapping the layout of the school. It was the same as always. Learn the building, learn the exits, stay out of the way. Don't draw attention. By the time lunch arrived, her shoulders ached from tension. She carried her tray to a corner table near the windows and sat down alone. The cafeteria was buzzing with chatter, cliques forming their usual territories. She peeled the crust off her sandwich mechanically, her eyes scanning the room like sonar. She wasn't looking for friends. She was looking for threats. And there he was. The same boy who had smirked in homeroom. He entered the cafeteria like he owned it, flanked by 2 other boys who walked half a step behind him. He wore a fitted Letterman jacket, his blonde hair neatly gelled, his movements confident and loud. People made room for him without thinking. He was a name here, a presence. He slapped hands, grinned broadly, laughed too loud. His gaze swept the room and landed on her. Their eyes met for a second. He raised his eyebrows like he couldn't believe she was still here, still trying to pretend she belonged. His name, she would later learn, was Justin Hayward, quarterback, senior, son of Senator Charles Hayward, a name that meant power in Ridgeview. Justin lived in a 6-bedroom house with a pool and a 3-car garage. He had never heard no in his life and didn't take well to it when he did. Naya broke eye contact and returned to her sandwich. By the end of the day, she had memorized her locker combination and managed not to cry, which, in her mind, counted as success. She waited until the halls were nearly empty before slipping out the side entrance. The sun was already beginning to dip behind the trees as she walked home. Their house sat near the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Carol's car was in the driveway. Naya paused on the porch, took a breath, and stepped inside. Her mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She looked up with a tired smile. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" Naya shrugged and opened the fridge. "Fine. Make any friends?" "Too soon to tell." Carol studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, I'm here if you want to talk." Naya nodded and headed up the stairs. In her room, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They were calloused, strong, fingers that had learned grip strength before algebra. She remembered the endless drills with her brother Elijah, how he had coached her through bruises and blisters, taught her to breathe through pain, taught her when to strike and when to hold back. Elijah had died 2 years ago. Wrong place, wrong time. A confrontation with the police officer that had spiraled out of control. No charges were filed. Naya had not spoken about it since. Not even to Carol. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the whisper of the wind through the trees outside. Her muscles itched with unused energy. She hadn't trained since the move, hadn't hit a pad or stretched into a proper stance. She was supposed to leave all that behind. Carol had made her promise, no fighting, no trouble, just a normal school year. Naya had nodded, but deep inside, something had twisted. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she knew what kind of boys ruled schools like this. She had seen their type before. Privileged, arrogant, cruel in the way only the confident can be. She closed her eyes and told herself, just get through the week. One day at a time. But the next day was worse. In the locker room before gym class, someone had unzipped her bag and dumped her clothes in the trash. The coach found her in the bathroom wearing her hoodie over gym shorts and gave her a warning for not being prepared. No one confessed. No one apologized. And when she walked into the gym, Justin was already grinning at her from across the court. He made a loud show of announcing his team for basketball. "I want Adam and Troy," he said, "and not her." Someone snickered. Naya didn't react. She played the game with quiet precision, scoring twice and blocking a shot from Adam with ease. But every move was met with comments. "Didn't know Chicago taught girls to play like boys," Troy muttered. "Bet she used to beat up kids for lunch money." At the end of class, she walked past Justin. He leaned close and said under his breath, "You're not gonna last here." That night, Naya returned home, threw her bag down, and went into the basement. Carol had cleared a space for storage, but there was enough room for a mat. Naya unrolled it, stretched her arms, and dropped into a stance. She began with footwork, light, precise steps across the floor, then moved into shadow boxing. She didn't imagine Justin's face. That wasn't her style. But she did remember his eyes, that lazy contempt, that certainty. She hit the air harder. Carol found her an hour later, sweat pouring down her back. "I thought we agreed." Niall wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm just training." "You promised." "I know what I promised." There was silence between them. Then Carol sighed. "Just don't forget who you are." "I haven't," Naya whispered. But as she went to bed, her fists ached with the memory of motion. The first cracks had started to form, and deep in her bones she could feel it. This school wasn't going to let her stay invisible. Not for long. The following week unfurled like a slow-burning match. Naya arrived at school each morning before the bell, walked the same halls, sat in the same seats, and did her best to become invisible. But Ridgeview High was not a place that allowed people like her to disappear. The more she tried to blend in, the more it seemed the school wanted to remind her that she didn't belong. There were no outright fights, no obvious threats, nothing that would qualify as disciplinary action. It was subtler than that, death by 1,000 paper cuts. The first insult came on a Tuesday morning in the form of laughter. She walked into history class to find a crude drawing taped to her desk. A caricature with exaggerated lips and hair, labeled with the word import. Someone had even taken the time to draw a tiny boat. Naya stared at it for a moment, feeling the heat rise behind her eyes. She peeled it off without a word and sat down. The laughter subsided, but the message lingered. By lunch, the whispers had started. They followed her down hallways like shadows. "Chicago trash," someone hissed as she passed. Another day, someone nudged her tray in the cafeteria line, causing her apple to roll to the floor. A boy stepped on it deliberately, smirking as he walked away. She said nothing. She picked up the crushed fruit and dumped it in the trash. No one helped. No one interfered. Even the teachers seemed to maintain a practiced distance. They spoke to her in clipped tones and didn't ask questions. At first, she thought she might be imagining it, but after a week of polite indifference and visible tension, she understood. It wasn't just the students. The adults were watching her too, like they were waiting. One afternoon, as she stood by her locker organizing her books, a thump echoed down the corridor. Her math textbook had fallen, except she hadn't dropped it. When she turned, Troy was already walking away, smirking, his shoulder bump lingering like a bruise. His friend Adam stood by a nearby locker, arms crossed, watching the whole thing like it was a show. She picked up the book and walked away. Her legs were steady. Her hands were not. The worst part was the silence. No one warned her. No one whispered a warning or offered a seat at lunch. Ridgeview was a school built on social currency, and she had none. To the other students, she was an anomaly, an unknown variable in an equation they had long since memorized. The rich white kids ruled the school, the athletes formed its spine, and Justin Hayward was the heart of it all. He hadn't forgotten about her. His presence lingered in her day like the hum of distant thunder, never near enough to strike directly, but close enough to remind her he could. He watched her with lazy contempt during gym, commented loudly when she performed well, and smiled at her with exaggerated politeness that dripped venom. By the second week, it wasn't just passive aggression. The jokes became more personal. In chemistry class, Kyle, a wiry boy with sharp features and a voice like static, dropped his pencil and accidentally elbowed her in the ribs as he picked it up. During group work, she was always the last picked, if picked at all. One afternoon, someone wrote "Back to the Jungle" across her locker in the whiteboard marker. She cleaned it off herself. Carol noticed something was wrong. She wasn't blind. Naya had become quieter, more withdrawn than usual. At dinner, she barely spoke. She played with her food, her eyes dark and far away, but every time Carol asked, Naya said the same thing. "I'm fine." Carol didn't believe her, but she didn't push either. Naya kept everything inside. At night, when the house was silent, she slipped down into the basement, unrolled her mat, and trained. Punches, kicks, takedowns. Her body moved on instinct, muscle memory guiding each strike. It wasn't anger that fueled her. Not yet. It was restraint. Control. The promise she'd made to Carol echoed in her ears. No trouble, no fighting, just a normal year. But control had a cost, and every day at school she paid it in small, humiliating installments. Friday brought the worst of it. She arrived at school to find her locker slightly ajar. Her books were soaked, her spiral notebooks were ruined, pages smeared with water and ink. Someone had dumped a full bottle of juice over everything and left the cap inside like a calling card. Her gym clothes were missing. She stood there in silence, breathing through her nose, willing her eyes to stay dry. She carried her ruined books to the bathroom and sat in the last stall, holding them in her lap like wounded birds. Her fingers curled around the edge of a page and tore it clean. One, then another. That night, she didn't go to the basement. She didn't eat dinner. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart heavy and throat tight. The next morning, she got up before dawn. She tied her braids tighter than usual and changed into her workout gear. She didn't warm up. She didn't stretch. She simply started to move. Kicks, strikes, holds, sweeps, faster and faster until the air in the basement pulsed with the sound of her feet on the mat. When she finally stopped, sweat ran in rivulets down her back. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She didn't feel better, but she felt clearer. At school on Monday, the pattern continued. No one had been punished for the ruined locker. No one had even asked. The incident hadn't been reported. Naya hadn't said a word. She just walked through the doors, books replaced, gym clothes clean, eyes focused forward. If the boys expected her to look broken, they were disappointed. Justin noticed. He studied her that morning in the homeroom with narrowed eyes like a lion watching a deer that refused to flinch. That afternoon, during lunch, they pushed further. Naya was sitting alone again, eating quietly. The cafeteria was full. The air buzzed with laughter, voices, the clatter of trays. Without warning, someone bumped into her table. Her water bottle tipped over. The contents spilled across her tray and soaked into her sandwich. "Oops," Troy said, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Didn't see you there." Justin laughed from a few steps away. "Should have worn a neon sign." Naya looked at them, eyes steady. She said nothing. "Not going to say anything?" Kyle asked, sitting down across from her uninvited. "Come on, new girl, you've got to learn the rules." "What rules?" she asked quietly. Justin leaned in. "Simple ones. You keep your head down. You smile when we talk to you. You remember where you are." Kyle laughed. "And maybe say thank you when we're being nice." She stood up, water dripping from her tray. Justin's voice followed her. "You know, silence isn't strength. It just makes you boring." She walked away. They watched her go. That night, she told Carol she had extra homework and needed to stay up late. Carol smiled gently, ruffled her hair, and went to bed. In the basement, Naya set a timer for 2 hours and trained until her legs trembled. She didn't want to fight. She truly didn't. But she knew it was coming. Boys like Justin never stopped when they thought they were winning, and Ridgeview High was teaching her something important. Silence could be mistaken for weakness. kindness could be confused for fear. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting, and the line between patience and action was growing thinner every day. The morning was unusually warm for October, the sun rising with a quiet, golden defiance over Ridgeview's carefully trimmed lawns and uniformly spaced trees. Birds chirped from telephone lines, sprinklers hummed across front yards, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower droned to life. It was the kind of morning that would have felt almost serene, if not for the tightness in Naya's chest. She woke early, as she had for weeks now, but instead of stretching or heading downstairs to train, she sat motionless on the edge of her bed. Her backpack leaned against the wall, zipper halfway open, notebook stacked neatly inside. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, but she ignored it. The anxiety that had built inside her over the last 2 weeks had taken root deep in her ribs, pulsing like a quiet drumbeat. Every breath reminded her that the tension hadn't gone away. It had just been waiting. At school, the halls felt louder than usual. Conversations bounced off the lockers in rapid-fire bursts. Laughter echoed with a sharpness that grated at her nerves. There was a charge in the air, something buzzing just under the surface, invisible yet unmistakable. Her walk to her locker felt longer than usual. Her fingers turned the combination slowly, methodically. Click, clack, open. Her books were still dry, her belongings untouched, but that only made her warier. By third period, her body felt stiff, every step measured. She kept her head down and moved through the hallways like a shadow. In the cafeteria, she hesitated. Her table was still empty, as always. In the middle of the room, Justin and his friends had already claimed their usual spot, surrounded by the noise and comfort of popularity. A group of girls giggled near them. Laughter shot like arrows across the space. Naya made her way to the corner, sat down, and unpacked her lunch in silence. She took one bite of her apple. Then it happened. The scrape of a chair, a sudden hush. Footsteps, too many to ignore, approached from behind. The shadow that fell across her tray was unmistakable. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Hey, Chicago," Justin's voice rang out. She kept eating as if he wasn't there. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" His tone was theatrical, loud enough to draw the attention of half the room. Murmurs passed from table to table like wildfire. She still didn't respond. Justin leaned down, placing his hand on the table beside her tray. "I think we need to clear something up." She looked up then. His grin was wide, confident. Behind him stood Troy, Adam, Kyle, and at least 3 other members of the football team. "I think you've forgotten who runs this place," Justin said. "I don't care," Naya replied, calm and cold. The air changed. A murmur swept through the room like a ripple. Justin's smile faltered for the briefest second before returning with double the force. "Oh, we're doing the attitude thing now?" he asked. "You think just because you're quiet, you're untouchable?" She didn't answer. "I mean," he said, turning to his audience, "we're being patient, welcoming even, and she thinks she's better than us." Laughter. He leaned down again, closer this time. "You don't get it, do you? This school is about respect, and you haven't earned any." Then, before anyone could move, before anyone could react, Justin's hand moved. In one sharp, practiced motion, he reached for the hem of her skirt and jerked it upward. Gasps erupted from every corner of the cafeteria. For a second, everything stood still. Her skirt fluttered and dropped back down almost instantly, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Someone laughed. Another pulled out a phone, camera already recording. The moment stretched impossibly long, faces frozen, eyes wide. Naya stood up. Her tray clattered to the floor. Her face was unreadable. Not red with shame, not pale with fear. It was carved from stone. Justin's grin faltered. She stepped back, dropped her backpack behind her, and pulled her hoodie over her head. Beneath it, she wore a simple black t-shirt. Her hands moved with eerie calm as she tightened her ponytail, smoothing her braids. The cafeteria remained silent, save for the faint hum of a vending machine. What are you doing?" Troy asked, the laughter in his voice unsure. Naya took one step forward, then another. Her shoulders rolled back and her knees bent slightly. Justin opened his mouth, perhaps to mock her, perhaps to warn her, but he never got the chance. Her body exploded into motion. The first strike was a blur, an open palm shoved to his chest that sent him stumbling backward into Troy. Before either of them could regain footing, Naya spun and swept her leg behind Justin's, knocking him flat onto his back with a loud thud. Troy lunged, but she was already moving. She sidestepped, caught his wrist and twisted it just enough to make him yelp and fall to his knees. Adam froze halfway to her, hands half raised, uncertainty written all over his face. By the time Justin tried to sit up, Naya was already standing over him. Her foot hovered an inch from his chest, not touching, not pressing, just there, like a question mark. The cameras caught everything. She lowered her foot. "You're done," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. No one moved. No one spoke. She picked up her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out of the cafeteria. Behind her, chaos erupted. Whispers turned to shouts. Videos were uploaded in real time. Teachers came running. But Naya didn't look back. She walked straight to the front office, where the receptionist blinked at her in stunned silence. Without waiting for instruction, Naya sat down in the waiting area and folded her hands in her lap. The principal didn't make her wait long. Inside his office, Dr. Klein wore an expression that wavered between outrage and disbelief. The phone on his desk buzzed constantly. Outside the frosted glass, staff members whispered furiously. "You assaulted another student," he said after she sat down. "Several students. In full view of—" "I defended myself," Naya replied. "You lifted your hand in violence." "He lifted my skirt in front of the entire school." Dr. Klein paused. "That hasn't been confirmed. There are videos." He inhaled sharply. "Even so, would you like to see them?" He didn't answer. "I can send you 5 right now," she continued. "1 from the front, 2 from the side, 1 from behind, and 1 where you can hear someone laugh and say, 'She deserved it.'" Dr. Klein looked away. The phone buzzed again. "Wait here," he said finally. She did. 20 minutes later, Carol arrived, breathless and pale. She rushed to Naya's side, hand shaking as it found her daughter's shoulder. "What happened?" "I defended myself," Naya said again. Carol looked at Dr. Klein. "Is she suspended?" He shook his head slowly. "We're reviewing." "Reviewing," Carol repeated. "We have to investigate. There are multiple accounts. And the Haywards—" Carol straightened. "The Haywards?" Dr. Klein didn't respond. Carol's face darkened. "Of course." The meeting ended with promises of further discussion and ongoing review. Naya was allowed to return home for the day. On the walk to the car, Carol said nothing. Inside, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry," Naya said quietly. "You don't need to be. But I promised. You did what you had to do." Back home, Naya went straight to her room. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, and closed her eyes. Her muscles still buzzed with adrenaline. Her hands trembled faintly, but she wasn't afraid. She wasn't ashamed. For the first time since arriving in Ridgeview, she felt whole. Downstairs, Carol called someone, likely a lawyer, maybe a reporter. By that evening, #Nia Harris was trending on social media. The video had gone viral. The footage of her takedown had already been shared thousands of times. Comments flooded in, some praising her, others condemning her. Debates erupted in comment sections. News outlets reached out. Offers came in from martial arts studios and women's rights organizations. But Nia ignored them all. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, breathing slowly. She had broken her promise, but not her word. She hadn't lashed out in anger. She hadn't started a fight. She had ended one. And somehow she knew this was only the beginning. By the time the sun rose over Ridgeview the next morning, the entire town had heard what had happened in the cafeteria. The story had spread beyond the school walls like a brush fire, carried by whispers, screenshots, and pixelated videos posted to every platform imaginable. Nia's name was on everyone's lips. Teachers, students, parents, even strangers in the grocery store. Depending on who was speaking, she was either a violent delinquent or a brave young woman who had finally drawn a line. Nia herself woke early, not to train, not to review schoolwork, but simply because her body refused to sleep. She lay in bed, watching the morning light creep across her ceiling. There was no fear in her chest, no dread, not anymore. What she felt was something quieter, more deliberate, a readiness that ran bone deep. She had spent years building control, learning when to strike and when to walk away. Yesterday, she had chosen, and she had no regrets. Downstairs, Carol was already at the kitchen table, phone in one hand, laptop open in front of her. Her expression was drawn, focused. She looked up when Nia entered, eyes scanning her daughter's face for signs of stress. "How did you sleep?" she asked. Nia poured herself a glass of orange juice. "Fine. You're not going to school today." Nia nodded, unsurprised. Carol clicked open a new tab. The district sent an email. They're conducting a full investigation. Apparently, some parents are threatening to pull their kids out if you're not suspended. "I didn't start it," Nia said quietly. Carol's voice sharpened. "I know, and you have nothing to be ashamed of." They're scared of the truth. They're scared of losing control. Carol leaned back and sighed. There's a difference. The day passed slowly. Nia stayed off social media. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Texts from unknown numbers, direct messages from students she'd never spoken to. She silenced all notifications, turned the screen face down, and sat at the kitchen window watching the wind bend the trees. She could feel something shifting around her, like the air before a storm. It came sooner than expected. By late afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Carol answered, and in stepped Principal Klein, accompanied by a tight-lipped woman in a gray blazer who introduced herself as the district's legal liaison. Nia remained seated while the adults spoke in the living room, the tones alternating between restrained diplomacy and barely concealed tension. She listened without moving. Carol's voice rose once, sharp and clear. She defended herself in full view of 200 students. You don't get to rewrite that. We're not rewriting, the woman replied. We're just trying to assess the appropriate response. Appropriate for whom? There was a long silence. Eventually, they left with promises of further communication. Carol returned to the kitchen, her jaw tight. They're stalling, buying time while the Haywards pull strings. Let them, Nia said. That night, she went to the basement. She didn't train. She just stood on the mat, staring at the punching bag, arms hanging loosely at her sides. After a while, she sat cross-legged on the floor and closed her eyes. She thought of Elijah. He would have laughed at how calm she'd stayed. He would have reminded her how long it took her to learn balance, how she used to throw wild punches just to prove she wasn't scared. He'd been the one to teach her that real strength wasn't loud. It was still, patient, coiled like a spring. She remembered his voice in the gym, his hand on her shoulder. Don't fight to hurt, fight to protect. And that was exactly what she had done. The following day, she returned to school. Students parted as she walked down the hall. Conversations died mid-sentence. Some stared openly, others lowered their eyes. No one laughed. No one mocked. She was still alone, but it was a different kind of solitude now. It wasn't isolation. It was space, the kind that came when people weren't sure what to do with your presence. In her classes, teachers avoided her gaze. Her locker remained untouched. At lunch, she sat at her usual table, alone. But this time, she felt watched not by hostility, but by something closer to reverence. Halfway through lunch, a girl approached her table. It was Alina Mendoza, a junior from her chemistry class. Short, soft-spoken, always accompanied by a group of girls who usually kept their distance. Alina paused in front of the table, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. "Can I sit?" Naya looked up, nodded once. Alina sat. The silence between them was brief, but not uncomfortable. "Thank you," Alina said finally. "For what?" "For doing what the rest of us never could." Naya didn't respond. She didn't need to. Alina hesitated. Do you think you could show me how to do that?" Naya blinked. "Do what?" "Whatever you did to Justin. The way you moved, it was like he didn't even have a chance. I don't want to fight anyone, She broke off, cheeks reddening. "I just want to stop being afraid." Naya looked at her, really looked at her. Alina's shoulders were tense, her hands clenched tight around her fork. Behind her eyes, Naya recognized the same fear she had carried for years, the fear of being small, of being prey. "Okay," she said softly. "I can teach you." The next day, 3 more girls joined. By the end of the week, there were 9. They met behind the gym after school, in the shadow of the bleachers. Naya brought pads from home, duct tape, a yoga mat. The first sessions were simple. Footwork, balance, stance. She kept her instructions clear and focused. No flash, no ego, just control. More girls came, then a few boys. Soon, even students who had never spoken to her before started stopping her in the halls. Some asked questions. Others just nodded in quiet respect. One afternoon, a faculty member, Miss Lone from the history department, approached her in the library. "I heard you've been working with some of the students," she said cautiously. Naya nodded. "You have a gift. If you're willing, I can help you apply for an extracurricular permit. That way, you can use the gym officially." Naya was surprised. "You'd do that?" Miss Sloane smiled faintly. "The school has needed someone like you for a long time." By the following Monday, Naya had an approved after-school program. They called it Empowered. Classes were held twice a week in the gym. At first, it was just technique, self-defense, awareness, breath control. But gradually, it became something more. Students began staying after class to talk, to share. Stories surfaced of harassment, of bullying, of silence. Ridgeview High had been holding its breath for years, and now it was finally beginning to exhale. The administration watched warily but didn't intervene. Not yet. Justin, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent. After the cafeteria incident, he had been suspended for 5 days. His return was quiet. No announcements, no apologies. He walked the halls with his head down, no longer the king of the school, now just another student trying to navigate the wreckage of his reputation. He never looked at Naya, and she never gave him the chance. But the whispers didn't stop. Some parents, especially those aligned with the Haywards, pushed for her removal. Anonymous letters were sent to the school board. Complaints were filed. "She's violent," they said. "She's dangerous." Others fought back. Parents of students in her class wrote letters of support. One woman offered to donate equipment to the Empowered program. A local gym owner volunteered to co-sponsor a safety seminar. The town was divided, but the students weren't. Naya had become something more than a fighter. She was a symbol. A week later, at the end of one of her sessions, Miss Sloan entered the gym with a stack of printed emails. "These are from the district," she said quietly. "There's going to be a meeting." "What kind of meeting?" "A public hearing. About you, about the program. Some want it shut down." Naya felt the weight of the words. She looked at the faces of the students packing away pads and gloves. Some of them barely spoke in class. Some had never even stood up for themselves in the lunch line. But here, on this mat, they stood taller. "Let them come," Naya said. The hearing was scheduled for Friday evening, and the school had never been more alive. The week of the hearing arrived with a cold bite in the air, the sky hanging low over Ridgeview like a weighted blanket. Autumn had finally made itself known. Trees that only days ago had stood green and full now exploded with fire orange and blood-red leaves that carpeted the sidewalks. But while the season was changing outside, inside the walls of Ridgeview High, something deeper had begun to shift. The whispers that once stalked Naya through the halls had gone silent. No one snickered when she passed. No one knocked her books from her hands. Even the teachers had changed. They no longer avoided her gaze, but instead acknowledged her with respectful nods or quiet greetings. Where there had once been suspicion, now there was reluctant admiration. And, in some cases, gratitude. The Empowered program had exploded in popularity. What had begun as a quiet gathering of a few girls beneath the bleachers was now a full-fledged after-school initiative, officially sanctioned, supervised by a rotating roster of teachers, and increasingly well-attended. The gym, once half-empty by late afternoon, now echoed with movement, instruction, and laughter. Mats were rolled out across the hardwood floors, punching pads lined the wall, and a whiteboard in the corner bore weekly schedules and self-defense tips in bold marker. Naya stood at the center of it all. Her instruction was never harsh, never theatrical. She moved like water, graceful, composed, unwavering. She corrected stances gently, demonstrated techniques with precision, and explained everything with a clarity that came not just from practice, but from experience. She wasn't there to make warriors. She was there to make people feel safe. After each session, students lingered. They talked, they shared. Some opened up about things they hadn't told anyone, past bullying, harassment, fears they carried in silence. Naya listened. She didn't try to fix everything. She simply gave them space. Sometimes space was the first step. Even some of the boys began to attend. At first, it was cautious curiosity, driven by rumors and admiration. Then came genuine interest. A few athletes, ones who had once watched her with skepticism, now stayed after practice to ask about footwork, balance, strategy. Naya welcomed them like she did everyone else, without judgment, but with firm expectations. Respect wasn't a gift. It was earned. She learned that the hard way, but not everyone wanted her to succeed. Rumors continued to surface, low, persistent, always just beneath the surface. Parents, particularly those from Ridgeview's more influential families, began to stir. They whispered in school board meetings, made calls to the superintendent, exchanged clipped emails in PTA forums. The Haywards led the charge quietly but effectively. According to them, Naya was a disruption, a liability, a troublemaker from the city who had brought violence into their safe school. The public hearing was their weapon. The week leading up to it was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Flyers were posted in town, some in support, others not. The local news announced it as a discussion on student conduct and campus safety, but everyone knew what it was really about. Naya, for her part, kept training. She refused to be distracted. She arrived early to school, completed her classwork, and led empowered sessions with unwavering focus. Her presence was calm, but beneath it, a storm brewed, not a anger, but a readiness. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one, just not the kind they expected. On Wednesday, a new face appeared in the gym. He was tall, in his 30s, with the physique of a lifelong athlete. His eyes were steady but kind, and when he introduced himself as Coach Brenner, the gym teacher who had taken a sudden interest in Empowered, the students responded with polite silence. Naya, however, was cautious. After class, he approached her while she was stacking mats. "You've built something strong here," he said. "Thank you," she replied simply. He watched her a moment longer. "Just be careful. Power makes people uncomfortable." "I know." He nodded, then smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're ready." That evening, Carol sat Naya down in the kitchen. "There's going to be press at the hearing," she said gently. "Possibly even cameras." Naya looked up from her notes. "They want to make it public. They want to control the narrative. Then we tell our own." Carol smiled. "I'm proud of you, you know." Naya nodded. "I know." The night of the hearing arrived cold and cloudless. Ridgeview's town hall, a red brick building with a clock tower, filled quickly. Rows of chairs stretched from wall to wall, every seat taken. Parents, teachers, students, reporters, everyone had come. Some wore suits and pearls. Others wore school jackets. A few wore T-shirts with the word Empowered hand-painted across the front. Naya arrived with Carol beside her. She wore a black button-up shirt, dark jeans, and the same quiet confidence she'd carried since day one. As she walked into the hall, conversations died. People turned to look. Some nodded. Others stared. Justin and his parents sat near the front. Senator Hayward stiff in his seat, his wife whispering behind a manicured hand. The school board took their places on stage. The superintendent gave a brief, scripted welcome, then opened the floor to community feedback. A man in a blazer stepped forward first. "I'm speaking as a parent of 2 students at Ridgeview," he began. "And I want to be clear. I don't condone violence. But what happened in that cafeteria wasn't violence. It was a response. A girl was harassed. She stood her ground. That's not a threat. That's strength." Applause broke out from a corner of the room. Next came a woman in pearls. "I've lived here 20 years, she said. "We don't need vigilantes in our schools." Murmurs, a few claps, a few scoffs. Then came the turning point. Alina Mendoza stepped forward, hands shaken slightly. She wore her Ridgeview hoodie and a determined look. "My name is Alina," she said, voice trembling. "I used to be scared every day, scared to walk home, scared to speak up. But since Naya started teaching us, I'm not scared anymore." Her voice grew stronger. She didn't bring fear to this school. She brought courage. A full section of students stood to clap. Teachers, too. Justin's parents whispered furiously to each other. Finally, the board called Naya to speak. She stepped up to the microphone. She didn't read from a script. She didn't bring notes. She looked out at the room, at the faces that had once ignored her, mocked her, dismissed her, at the faces that now watched her with attention, with respect, with hope. "I didn't come to Ridgeview to be a fighter," she said. "I came because my mom got a job and I wanted a normal year. I tried to stay quiet. I tried to stay invisible, but silence doesn't stop people from hurting you." She paused, letting the words settle. "I defended myself because no one else would, and when I did, people noticed. Not just the ones who were scared of me, but the ones who needed someone to stand up." She looked at Justin, then past him. "I teach self-defense. Not so people can fight, but so they don't have to be afraid anymore. That's all." She stepped back. There was a beat of silence, then applause, long, loud, rising to the rafters. The board didn't vote that night. They promised to consider the testimonies and evaluate all perspectives. But everyone in the room knew what the outcome would be. When Naya and Carol walked outside, a crowd had gathered by the steps, students, parents, even strangers. Some reached out to shake her hand. Others just smiled. Alina hugged her. "Thank you," she whispered again. Naya smiled. "You're welcome." The next morning, the school posted a message online. Empowered will continue as a permanent extracurricular program. Naya didn't celebrate. She just returned to training. But inside, she felt something shift again. Not fear, not relief, purpose. The announcement that Empowered would continue as a permanent program swept through the school like a wave. On the morning following the hearing, Ridgeview High felt different. The atmosphere buzzed with a strange mixture of relief, admiration, and unease. Some students walked taller in the halls, their steps a little more assured, as if simply knowing that someone like Naya existed among them made the world a little safer. Others avoided her entirely, and a few, the ones with last names that held power in Ridgeview, watched her with quiet calculation, like predators forced into stillness. Naya arrived early that morning, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hands tucked into the pockets of a dark jacket. The cold was back, biting at her face as she crossed the parking lot. She didn't expect fanfare. She wasn't looking for it. All she wanted was a return to routine. Class, study, training. But she knew deep down that things were far from over. There were still glances in the hallways, whispered conversations that cut off when she passed. But there were also nods from teachers who had never acknowledged her before, and quiet greetings from students who had once looked right through her. More than once, someone slipped a note into her locker. Handwritten messages of thanks. Requests to join Empowered. Stories from students who had never spoken aloud about what they had endured. And then, of course, there was Justin. He returned to school the Monday after the hearing. He moved like a shadow, always in the corner of rooms, never the center. The seat he used to command in the cafeteria remained conspicuously empty even when he sat in it. His former crew had scattered, their loyalty evaporated under the weight of exposure. He didn't look at Naya, not once, but she could feel him watching, not with arrogance or contempt, but with something closer to regret. Still, the world had not forgiven him. The Haywards had tried to spin the narrative in local media. Boys will be boys, wrapped in polished legal rhetoric. Overreaction, they called it. A teachable moment. But the video said otherwise. The voices of the students said otherwise. And perhaps most importantly, Naya's silence on the matter, her refusal to publicly humiliate or campaign against Justin, only made her stronger in the public eye. Then came the lawsuit. It arrived in a formal envelope delivered to Carol's office at the college, complete with the official seal of the Hayward legal team. Carol opened it in silence, her fingers tight against the paper. She read the lines twice, then handed it to Naya without a word. It was a civil complaint, filed on behalf of Justin Hayward by his parents, alleging emotional distress and physical harm. The suit claimed that Naya's actions had caused irreversible psychological damage, and that her pattern of aggressive behavior constituted a threat to the safety of others. They demanded restitution. They demanded a public apology. They demanded suspension from all extracurricular activities and a formal note of disciplinary action in her permanent record. It was vindictive, absurd, and entirely expected. For a long moment, Naya said nothing. She simply stared at the paper, feeling the tension rise like a slow tide. Then she placed it on the kitchen counter and looked at her mother. "Let's fight." Carol nodded once. "We will." The town divided again. If the hearing had forced people to pick sides, the lawsuit drew deeper, sharper lines. Letters to the editor filled the local paper. Anonymous posts on community forums argued over who was the real victim. Protest signs appeared outside the school, some in support of Naya, some denouncing violence. National media picked up the story within days. Naya Harris, the teen fighter, sued for standing her ground. Interviews were requested. Carol turned them all down. "We speak in court," she told her daughter, "nowhere else." The trial date was set for 2 months later. In the meantime, Naya lived in a strange limbo. She still trained. She still led empowered. But the sense of peace she had begun to feel was gone, replaced with a steady, buzzing alertness. Not fear, not exactly, but vigilance, the kind of readiness that came from knowing people were watching, waiting for a misstep. At school, support grew louder. More students joined empowered. Some of the younger ones started walking to class in pairs, holding their heads high. Others began volunteering at lunch, helping students with disabilities find seats, keeping an eye out for bullies. A culture shift had begun, slow but real. And yet, beneath all of it, the tension remained. The Haywards added fuel to the fire by filing a motion that painted Naya's training program as paramilitary instruction. They accused her of instigating a culture of fear and cited old incidents from her previous schools, many taken out of context, a few entirely fabricated. They scoured her history for anything they could weaponize. Carol and their attorney, Miss Zhao, fought back with precision. They gathered statements from teachers, students, even coaches from Naya's past. Video evidence from empowered sessions showed her clear instruction: de-escalation first. Control, safety, respect. The day of the trial arrived under a gray sky, the air damp with the threat of snow. The courtroom was packed. Students sat in the back rows, teachers near the middle. Reporters lined the walls. On one side sat the Haywards, Justin between his parents, his eyes downcast. On the other, Naya and Carol, seated beside Miss Zhao. The room buzzed with anticipation. Opening arguments were delivered with theatrical precision. The Haywards' lawyer, a tall, sharp-voiced man named Crowley, painted a vivid picture of a violent young woman with a history of aggression who had humiliated and traumatized a fellow student in a public spectacle of domination. Miss Zhao, calm and unflinching, simply said, "We will show you the truth." Witnesses took the stand. Justin's teammates were first. Their stories were vague, filled with hesitations. They spoke of discomfort, fear, but their words rang hollow under cross-examination. When asked whether Naya had ever threatened them before the cafeteria incident, they said no. When asked if Justin had ever made inappropriate remarks toward her, they dodged. Eventually, the judge intervened. "Answer the question directly," he instructed. Justin's mother testified next, her voice a mix of outrage and practiced sorrow. She spoke of sleepless nights, of a son who no longer trusted others. "He used to be so bright," she said. "Now he barely speaks." The courtroom shifted when Alina took the stand. She stood with her hands folded tightly, but her voice didn't shake. "I saw what happened that day. Justin lifted her skirt. Everyone saw it. He did it to humiliate her. And she reacted. Not with violence, but with control. She didn't hurt him. She stopped him." Crowley tried to twist her words. "Are you saying it's acceptable to attack someone in public?" "I'm saying it's unacceptable to assault someone and expect no consequences." Her words hung in the room like a bell. Then it was Naya's turn. She took the stand with a quiet dignity, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Miss Zhao guided her gently through her story, her training, her promise to her mother, the harassment she endured, the moment of the cafeteria. Naya spoke plainly. No embellishments, no dramatics. "I didn't want to fight," she said, "but I also didn't want to be a victim, and I wasn't going to let anyone else think that was their only choice either." Crowley tried to rattle her. "You could have walked away, couldn't you?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was tired of pretending that being silent was the same as being safe." "Are you proud of what you did?" "I'm proud I stood up." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. "On all counts," the foreman said, "we find in favor of the defendant." Carol's hand closed around Naya's. Justin didn't move. His mother gasped. His father's jaw clenched. The room erupted in hushed applause. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but his expression was calm. Outside, the air was colder. Reporters shouted questions, but Carol held up a hand. "No statements." They walked to the car in silence. At home, Naya sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. "It's over," Carol said, placing a cup of tea beside her. "No," Naya replied quietly. "It's just starting." She was right. That weekend, Empowered was featured in a national news segment. Letters poured in from across the country. Students, parents, teachers. Some were simple thanks. Others shared stories of pain, courage, change. One letter came from a girl in New Jersey. "I never thought I'd be brave enough to speak up. But now I think maybe I can be." Naya read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought of Elijah again. She imagined what he'd say, probably something half joking, half wise, but mostly she imagined the way he used to look at her when she got something right, not just in the gym, but in life. And for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The days that followed the verdict unfolded in soft, strange silence. Not the tense quiet that preceded confrontation, nor the uneasy hush of fear, but a calm, enduring stillness, like the moments after a heavy rain when the world feels both renewed and fragile. The town of Ridgeview had been shaken, its rhythms interrupted, its assumptions challenged. The trial, though brief, had pulled back the veil that so many had been content to ignore, revealing the rot beneath the surface. And now, everyone was watching to see what would come next. For Naya, life didn't resume so much as transform. She returned to school the next Monday to find her locker covered in notes, slips of paper taped to the metal, colorful post-its pressed between the vents, even a few folded letters slid through the slats. Some were signed, others anonymous. A few were poetic, full of admiration and metaphors. Most were simple. Thank you. You helped me. I'm not afraid anymore. Her hands shook slightly as she read them, one after the other, standing alone in the hallway while the morning bell rang out. Empowered, once seen by the administration as an inconvenient necessity, had now become a pillar of the school. Miss Sloane told her that several nearby schools had requested information about starting their own versions of the program. One district invited her to speak. Another offered to fund new mats, gloves, and instructional materials. A small group of girls from a neighboring school wrote to Naya directly, asking if they could attend a few sessions until they started one of their own. She said yes, of course. In the gym, the energy shifted. The students still trained, still learned to block, strike, breathe. But now they also taught. Naya noticed it in the way Alina stayed after class to help a 7th grader with her balance, or how one of the football players gently corrected a freshman's stance without mocking him. Empowered was no longer hers alone. It had grown into something communal, something alive. One afternoon, as she packed up the gear after a long session, Coach Brenner approached her with an envelope in hand. His expression was unreadable but kind. "This came for you through the front office," he said, handing it to her. "Thought you'd want to read it in private." She waited until she got home. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the edges of the envelope before opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in clean, deliberate strokes. The return address was from a juvenile rehabilitation center in another state. It was from Justin. "Dear Naya, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But I needed to write it. You probably know that after the trial my parents withdrew me from Ridgeview. They said it was for my safety, but I think it was mostly for their pride. I'm in a program now. I talk to someone twice a week. I'm trying to understand what I did. Not just the moment in the cafeteria, but everything before that. When I think about how I treated you, I feel ashamed. Not just because I got caught or because I was humiliated, but because I never thought of you as a person. I saw you as someone different, someone beneath me, someone to mock. That wasn't just cruelty, it was cowardice. I don't know if I'll ever deserve forgiveness, but I want to be better. Not to look better, to be better. Thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. I think that's what changed everything. Justin." She read the letter twice, then a third time. Her heart didn't race, her breath didn't catch. She just sat there for a long time, staring at the words. She didn't know if she would respond. She didn't know if she wanted to, but she folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with the others. The notes, the drawings, the anonymous messages. That night, she trained alone in the basement, not out of necessity, but out of ritual. The bag swayed beneath her fists, soft and rhythmic. She wasn't fighting an enemy anymore. She was just remembering who she was. Winter approached, and with it came a slow but steady metamorphosis. Ridgeview High announced that Empowered would now be accredited extracurricular activity, open to students from all schools in the district. Carol was asked to speak at a faculty summit about parental advocacy and school policy reform. A local nonprofit reached out with an offer to sponsor an annual scholarship in Naya's name. one that would go to a student who demonstrated resilience, leadership, and integrity in the face of adversity. The school board reluctantly approved a mural to be painted on the outer wall of the gym. Naya was hesitant at first. She didn't want her face on a building. She didn't want to be turned into a myth. But when artist, a former Ridgeview student, shared her idea, Naya agreed. The mural depicted a girl stand between two open doors, one labeled silence, the other strength. Behind her, shadows curled, undefined and menacing, but before her the light stretched wide. Her arms were raised, not in fists, but open, palms out, ready, willing, human. No name was printed. Just one word, in bold, sweeping letters: empowered. By spring, Naya had started mentoring a new group of younger students. The program had grown so large it required a second session and a new assistant. Alina took the role without hesitation, blossoming into a quiet but fierce leader. Other students followed, creating their own versions of the program in their neighborhoods, their churches, even their homes. And Naya began to write. At first, it was just a notebook, something to collect her thoughts. But as the weeks passed, the words flowed faster, deeper. She wrote about fear, about strength, about the silence between moments. She wrote about her brother, about Ridgeview, about the things people didn't see. It wasn't meant to be published. It was just hers. Her way of turning all of it into something she could hold. One afternoon, while waiting for Carol to finish work, Naya sat in the university library flipping through books. She came across a collection of essays by civil rights advocates, some well-known, some forgotten by time. In the margins of one essay, a student had underlined a line and written beside it in pencil, "This is what courage looks like." She smiled, not because she thought it applied to her, but because she finally understood the weight of it. Courage wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving yourself or standing on a stage or knocking someone to the ground. It was about choosing to be seen when the world would rather look away. About opening your hands instead of clenching your fists. About saying, "I matter," even when no one echoes it back. On the final day of school, as students streamed through the halls carrying boxes, hugging friends, and signing yearbooks, Naya stood near the front entrance watching it all unfold. She hadn't planned to do anything special. No speeches, no farewells. But as she turned to leave, she was stopped by a small girl, no older than 12, with dark skin, tightly braided hair, and a nervous smile. Are you Naya Harris?" the girl asked. "Yes," the girl beamed. "I'm starting next year. I want to join Empowered." Naya smiled. "Then I'll see you next fall." As she walked through the doors and into the sunlight, the world felt vast again. Not overwhelming, just full of possibility, of movement, of life. She didn't know where she would go next. College, maybe something bigger. She didn't have to decide yet. All she knew was this: she had changed something, and it would never be the same. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos and share this one with someone who needs to see it.